The footprint in the snow was 3 hours old. The thermal bleed was entirely gone, and the trail was deliberately leading them into a blind draw. Inside the Alaskan timberline, an American combat tracking element drawn from one of the most elite special mission units on Earth signaled a halt. They had been hunting a Canadian evasion force for 12 hours. They had overhead surveillance. They had infrared optics. They had decades of combined manhunting experience in the mountains of Afghanistan. But as the American team leader looked at the disturbed snow leading directly into a massive terrain choke point, he didn't push his men forward. He keyed his radio and issued a blunt command: stop following them. Because inside the world of Tier 1 special operations, when a trail suddenly looks too perfect in a tactically disadvantageous area, you aren't hunting anymore. You are walking into an ambush. To understand exactly what happened out in that timberline, you have to understand the environment. This was not a standard training base. This took place inside the Joint Pacific-Alaska Range Complex. J-Park is over 60,000 square miles of jagged terrain, deep snowpack, and suffocating pine forests. It is an environment where the temperature drops fast enough to kill a man who doesn't understand thermal regulation. When Allied units like Delta Force, the Green Berets, and Canada's JTF2 operate out here, they are running advanced special reconnaissance and evasion exercises. The premise is brutal. One team infiltrates to hit a target. The other team hunts them down. In modern warfare, if you drop a special operations element behind enemy lines, you assume the enemy will eventually find their insertion point. Once that happens, it becomes a foot race against a numerically superior tracking force. The evasion element has to reach an extraction window before the hunters close the distance. But running from a conventional infantry patrol is one thing. Running from a Tier 1 American tracking team is something different entirely. You cannot simply out-sprint them. You have to outthink the science of how they track. Combat tracking at this echelon is a forensic science. A trained tracker reads the woods like a map. They don't just look for a boot print in the mud. They look for the spoor, the physical, microscopic evidence of human passage. They look for a pebble that has been pressed into the dirt, exposing its darker, damp underside. They look for the absence of dew on a patch of grass. They look for the way a broken pine branch hangs, indicating the direction of travel. More importantly, they hunt using time. If an American tracker finds a crushed pine needle, they know the exact rate at which the sap inside that needle oxidizes and changes color. That biological clock tells them if the target passed through 10 minutes ago or 2 hours ago. They analyze stride length. If the distance between footprints is long and erratic, the prey is panicked and running. If the stride is short and deep, the prey is carrying heavy equipment and getting exhausted. They take that ground-level human intelligence, feed it to a command center, and combine it with overhead thermal drones. You find a data point, you project the target's azimuth, and you run them down. It is a relentless, high-speed machine. But that entire machine relies on one massive psychological assumption. It assumes the prey is running away. The Canadian element of Joint Task Force 2 are raised in the cold. The Canadian military infrastructure heavily emphasizes extreme winter warfare and deep woods survival. When you combine that cultural background with Tier 1 funding, you get an element that understands the woods better than the sensors trying to scan them. The Canadian evasion team knew they couldn't simply outrun the Americans. The snow was too deep, the gear was too heavy, and the hunters were too fast. Eventually, the gap would close. So they changed the math. They stopped running, and they started anti-tracking.
Anti-tracking is an exhausting, methodical discipline. It requires slowing down your movement to a crawl in order to systematically dismantle your own trail. The evasion element began implementing techniques designed specifically to feed bad data to the men following them. The first technique is step matching. When moving through deep snow, the point man breaks the trail. Every single operator behind him places their boot exactly into the footprint he just left. To a tracker moving fast, it looks like the trail of a single scout. It completely disguises the size and lethal capacity of the element. Then, they manipulate the direction of travel. The Canadians began walking backward through their own tracks. They brushed out the spoor at deliberate intervals using local vegetation. They took hard, right-angled turns off their expected azimuth, choosing to walk across exposed, freezing rock faces where rubber boots leave zero physical imprint. They were building a puzzle meant to shatter the Americans' momentum. Every time the tracking element found a contradictory piece of evidence, they had to halt the stack. They had to fan out. They had to cut a perimeter, search for the sign, and reacquire the primary trail. A pursuit that should have taken 3 hours suddenly stretched into 12. But defeating the man on the ground is only half the problem. You also have to defeat the sky. An overhead drone with a forward-looking infrared camera doesn't care if you step on a rock. It doesn't care if you brush your footpress. It sees the heat radiating off your body. In a freezing subarctic environment, a human being at 98 degrees Fahrenheit glows like a white-hot beacon against the dark background. Technology has hard limitations. Thermal sensors cannot see through solid mass. They cannot see through thick canopies of wet pine needles. And they cannot calculate temperature if there is no difference between the target and the environment. Thermal cameras rely on a concept called delta T, the difference in temperature between an object and its background. If you can reduce your delta T to 0, you become invisible to the machine. The JTF2 operators weaponized the dead space. They moved through deep ravines, tree wells, and geological depressions where the angle of the drone's camera simply couldn't reach them. When they had to rest or set a perimeter, they didn't just lean against a tree. They utilized thermal evasion blankets. But a blanket isn't enough to stop high-grade military sensors. They buried themselves under layers of natural insulation, snow, deadwood, and freezing earth. They matched their ambient temperature to the frozen ground around them. To the drone operator staring at a high-definition screen miles away, the mountainside looked completely empty. By stripping away the technological advantage, the Canadian operators forced the American element to rely entirely on visual, foot-by-foot tracking. They dragged the exercise back into the Stone Age. And in the Stone Age, the environment favors the man who is already dug in.
The realization didn't happen all at once. It was a slow, creeping understanding among the American tracking element. The point man signaled a halt. The trail had vanished again, but this time the geometry of the woods felt wrong. This didn't look like an evasion tactic. It looked deliberate. The tracks led down into a natural choke point, a narrow, heavily wooded draw flanked by steep elevation on both sides, and simply ceased to exist. If you were a conventional infantryman, you push forward, you walk into the draw to find where the tracks pick up again. If you are a Tier 1 operator, an alarm bell goes off in your head. A trail that abruptly vanishes in a tactically disadvantageous area is the universal signature of a counter-ambush. The JTF2 element hadn't lost their pursuers. They had drawn them exactly where they wanted them. The evasion force understood the psychology of the tracker. They knew the Americans would be hyper-focused on the ground, burning mental energy looking for the next broken twig or scuffed rock. When a tracker looks down, they lose their peripheral security. They stop scanning the ridgelines. The Canadians had likely looped back on their own trail, gained elevation, and set up overlapping fields of crossfire looking directly down into that draw. The American team leader read the terrain. He looked at the dead end. He looked at the high ground above them. He calculated the timeline. He knew that if this were a live combat deployment in a hostile country, stepping into that draw meant the entire tracking element was about to be wiped out by suppressed fire from operators they couldn't even see. The hunters had been manipulated into the fatal funnel. He didn't push his men forward just to complete the exercise. He made the only tactically sound decision available to a commander in that position. Stop following them. We are already in the kill zone. The exercise was called. During the after-action reviews, there is no ego. The debriefs inside these joint exercises are clinical, brutal, and entirely stripped of emotion. The American operators didn't view the lost trail as a failure. They viewed it as a masterclass in psychological manipulation. They sat down with the Canadian element and reverse engineered the entire pursuit. They asked the hard questions. Where did we lose you? How did you mask your thermal signature on the second ridgeline? When did you decide to hook back and set the ambush? Elite units study each other obsessively. They borrow techniques, they refine their own doctrines, and they violently shave away their weaknesses. The American trackers learned exactly what an elite anti-tracking protocol looks like in the deep timber, which means the next time they hunt an actual enemy trying to use those same techniques in a real war zone, they will recognize the pattern instantly. And the Canadians verified that their evasion doctrine holds up against the most technologically advanced man-hunting force on Earth. Mutual respect at this echelon isn't given because someone wears a specific flag on their shoulder. It is earned entirely through tactical competence, and forcing a Tier 1 tracking team to halt their pursuit out of sheer tactical self-preservation earns a very specific, quiet kind of respect. Inside modern special operations, reputation doesn't spread through press conferences. It spreads quietly, through after-action reviews, through shared deployments, through operators replaying the same tracking exercise over and over, trying to understand how another team vanished into the timber without leaving a trace. Moments inside these freezing training areas matter far beyond the exercise itself. Modern warfare is becoming increasingly transparent. Drones, satellites, and thermal sensors are making it nearly impossible to hide on a battlefield. The units that survive the next decade of combat won't necessarily be the ones with the most advanced technology. They will be the ones capable of operating entirely outside of it. The ones who remember how to manipulate the dirt, the snow, and the shadows to make the enemy question their own instruments. And out in the unforgiving cold of the Pacific Northwest, JTF2 gave Allied operators a very clear demonstration of exactly what that looks like. Modern warfare is changing faster than most people realize. On military warfare, we break down the doctrine, tactics, and battlefield psychology, shaping how elite units actually fight, beyond the headlines, beyond the Hollywood version. If that's the kind of analysis you're here for, subscribe to Military Warfare.